Robert De Niro once famously said, "Italy has changed, but Rome is Rome." This city has few equals when it comes to historical significance. Even now, in its current form as a modern European metropolis and the capital of Italy, the echoes of the world's most influential empire still reverberate around every street corner. Visiting Rome has always been high on our bucket list, but that certainly doesn't make us unique. It is actually one of the most visited cities on the European continent. So obviously that will come with big tourist crowds, and that's unfortunately just an inevitable obstacle with the experience of visiting Rome. Now you may be wondering, does YouTube really need another travel guide video about Rome? And to that I would say, fair point. But in this video, we will be sharing every aspect of our experience in Rome, both the good and the bad, so you'll know exactly what to expect if you are visiting the Eternal City. And if you're new here, welcome. My name's Max, and my girlfriend Sydney and I are currently on a 180-day trip around the world. Italy is our 4th stop on this 6-month trip around the globe. So be sure to like and subscribe if you're interested in following along. After our dream come true in Campania's Amalfi Coast, we took the train up to Rome as our final stop in Italy. The Roma Termini station is very centrally located and actually a pretty good place to base yourself if you are going to be in Rome for a few days. We stayed at the Hotel Artemide, which is a 10-minute walk from the train station, and it actually would have been a really pleasant walk if it weren't for an impressive heat wave that was going through Europe. More on that later. So, can we just take a quick second to acknowledge the insane amount of impact that the Roman Empire had on civilization as we know it? It is without a doubt one of the most fascinating societies that has ever existed in the history of humanity. A functioning currency and means of exchange, a plethora of professions and skilled work, running water, markets, museums, education, roads. I mean, they literally even had free time for entertainment. In a lot of ways, citizens at the peak of prosperity in ancient Rome were actually living better lives, they had better quality of life than most of the people living in Europe from the medieval age all the way up to the First World War. It's really hard to imagine and comprehend that all of that existed thousands of years ago, but we have the proof. Roman ruins exist to the east all the way to Iraq and Syria, and then to the northwest all the way to York in the north of England. I mean, just the span, the scale of this empire is absolutely impossible to comprehend. But the center of power and influence for this mighty empire existed right here in this city, which is why there is such an abundance of ancient ruins and artifacts. And that is one of the most fascinating parts about a visit to Rome. The crowning jewel of Rome's historical landmark collection is, of course, the Roman Coliseum. And yes, you may hear that it's a very touristy experience to go to the Coliseum and see it for yourself. You're going to be going through tourist crowds. They have all of it very organized with a time that you can go in. You really do have to book a tour in advance. You can't really just show up to the door. But do not miss out on this. Even if you're not a history buff, and I feel like I'll say that a lot in this video, even if you're not like totally into history, you're not a history connoisseur, you are still really going to appreciate the historical significance of this place and the Roman Forum, which is right next door. The Colosseum was a tool of imperial propaganda at the end of the day. It showcased the might of Rome. It was built to entertain and distract the public, but it was also to remind them of Rome's wealth, Rome's military power, and the ability to bring grand spectacles to life. So in a lot of ways, the people that were higher up in society and the people that were closer to running things were the people that lived really good lives in Rome. And the rest of people, considered peasants essentially, the quality of life was definitely not as high. But even those people, even people towards the bottom of the ranks of society, these people were able to go to the Coliseum and enjoy a spectacle, an absolutely amazing show of grandeur and entertainment that was not available to anyone else in the world at that time. So in a lot of ways, it was a distraction from any kind of hardship that people might have been having with the workload, the intense workload of a lot of these peasants, and just the living conditions not being quite up to standard as a lot of the people living in power in Rome. So it's estimated that only about a third of the actual structure still remains, But even that third, you can really get the scale and the idea of how big this place was. It compared to a lot of football and soccer stadiums that you'll see today. Capacity of anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000, depending on the type of event that they were putting on. I mean, that is right up there with any football field or any soccer stadium that I can imagine, some of the biggest in the world. It's absolutely insane to think that was happening thousands of years ago, and the fact that we still have so much of the Coliseum to appreciate, even after Rome was conquered and so much was destroyed, it's a really special thing, and definitely not something to miss out on. So I could rattle off so many facts about the Coliseum that I found fascinating from our tour, including that it's actually technically not called the Coliseum, it's called the Flavian Amphitheater, and the Coliseum the name comes from a different thing. But you'll learn that if you have a tour, and I can't recommend booking a tour enough. There is a link in the description for a skip the line ticket and a guided tour for both the Coliseum and the Roman Forum. If you use this link to book the tour, it's a great way to support our channel. We get a little kickback from it, and we really appreciate that. But it truly is the best experience. It's the same tour that we took while we were there, and we had a great guide. He was actually from Romania originally, but he just had all of this interesting, fascinating information about the Roman Empire. He was basically obsessed with the society, and he had so much information to share. I did not realize how much of the Roman Forum is missing, because when you're actually in there, it's right next to the Coliseum. It's this entire, it would have been basically like the city square of Rome. And you can imagine back in the day just the grandeur of it. There's not as much remaining as I thought, because when you're there, it really does feel like there's so much still there. It's absolutely insane how much is still there, considering how long ago this was. And also, as I mentioned before, Rome was completely sacked and conquered. So a lot of it was destroyed by the conquerors. But the Roman Forum is so cool, just walking through it and just imagining, picturing what it used to look like. And if you do go with a guide, or even if you just look it up yourself on your phone, just imagining what it used to look like. There's renderings and pictures online of what it used to look like, and you can really kind of put yourself in that mindset of what it would have been like to walk through Rome thousands of years ago. Depending on how into Roman history you actually are, I would plan on at least half a day just exploring the Coliseum and the Roman Forum next door. But if you're really, really into this stuff, you could spend an entire day there. There is so much to see, so much to take in. Even if you go to Palatine Hill, which is right next to the Forum, there's an amazing view of the entire city of Rome. You can see St. Peter's Basilica from there and just everything surrounding you. It's really stunning, really beautiful. And just all of the individual artifacts that still remain, the individual landmarks within the Roman Forum. It really is something, and I would say the #1 attraction you have to see if you're coming to Rome. So obviously, if you've done any research on Rome, you already know about the Coliseum, you maybe already know about the Forum as well, and you'll also know about the Trevi Fountain. This is something that is definitely worth seeing, but again, if you're planning your whole day around this, if you want like a photo shoot with this really famous fountain, you might want to spend a couple hours there. Most people just need to, walk by 15 minutes, 20 minutes, get your picture. And if you want to throw a coin into the fountain, the coins do go to a charity, and it's just supposed to be good luck. So if you're, into that kind of superstition, go ahead and throw a coin into the fountain. What really makes the Trevi Fountain special is that it's actually fed through a Roman aqueduct. The aqueduct that brings the water into the fountain was built by the Romans, and the Romans were really, really famous for this architecture, this type of technology. When I was talking about the running water before, it was one of the big bases behind how they were able to create that, the aqueducts. And there's so many examples of Roman aqueducts, not just in Italy, but all over Europe, where you can see this truly state-of-the-art technology at the time. So that's what's really cool about the Trevi Fountain, is that it's still fed by one of those aqueducts, and it's also just stunning. I mean, the design around the actual statue. The statue is Neptune, which is the god of the sea, the Roman god. It's definitely something to see, and definitely something you want to, if you're just kind of checking off the boxes, 15, 20 minutes tops. But if you really want to get that picture, there's big crowds around the fountain at pretty much all times of day. So make sure that you either get there early or you just wait long enough so you can get to the front and get your picture. Another landmark that is absolutely worth seeing if you're near the Trevi Fountain, it's just a short walk away from it, the Pantheon. This is actually, in my opinion, one of the most special buildings and special examples of Roman architecture in the entire city. The thing about a lot of the ancient Roman ruins that you're going to see is that they are indeed ruins. I mean, there's not a lot left of them, and you can kind of picture what they used to be, and that part is absolutely fascinating, but you're not getting the entire picture. With the Pantheon, it is one of the best preserved artifacts or landmarks, however you want to call it, in the entire city. It's completely still in its form, and when you go inside, it's a really, really special design on the ceiling and one of the coolest photo opportunities you'll have. Although when we did go in there, the circular part that's right under the ceiling where the light comes in, they did have that roped off, and it was probably because too many people were taking a lot of time getting their Instagram shot where the beam of light comes right down on top of you. So we unfortunately weren't able to get a picture like that because they had that roped off, but you can still see the effect of the sun coming right through the ceiling, and it is so cool the way it's designed. The Pantheon was originally constructed as a temple to all Roman gods. The name Pantheon comes from the Greek words pan, which means all, and then theos, which is gods. So the Romans, even though they did technically conquer the Greeks at the end of the day, they really admired the Greeks, which is why when you see Greek Hellenic style architecture, it looks very similar to what the Romans do with the columns and just all of the signature aspects of Roman architecture. A lot of it was inspired by the Greeks. A lot of their religions and the gods that they prayed to, a lot of it inspired from the Greeks. So it's pretty cool that this Pantheon, it was essentially a perfect example of what used to be the Hellenic empires, the Greek empires, when eventually became the Roman Empire, the different things that they took from that society and implemented it into their own society. The Pantheon is one of the best examples of that. The grandeur of the interior is hard to even describe. The colored marble, just the materials used in there. It was actually an inspiration for a lot of other buildings, including, if you're an American, the United States Capitol building. That was inspired originally by the design of the Pantheon. Actually going inside the Pantheon does require a ticket, but they're pretty easy to come by, especially if you get there early enough in the morning. But as most things in Rome, just to make sure, it always helps to pre-book and make sure that that's all taken care of before you get there. You do not want to miss the interior. The interior is the most special part of this building. So the hole in the ceiling where the light comes through, it's called the oculus, and it definitely has some religious ties to it. The idea that the light of the gods is shining into the building itself. That's definitely an idea behind the design, but it also goes further than that. It's actually a sundial as well. So it was a way to tell time and also the passage of the seasons, depending on where the light would go inside the building. Really cool stuff. And again, it's just amazing to think how ahead of their time the Romans really were. Another landmark that I would also consider a highlight of our trip was the Castel SantAngelo. It's right on the river. It's absolutely cool for a lot of different reasons. It's a fortress that was actually originally built as a mausoleum to the Emperor Hadrian. This goes all the way back to 139 AD. A very, very old structure, but it was recreated into a fortress more around the medieval times, like the 14th century. And because of that, it has a very medieval looking feel to it. It definitely feels like an impregnable fortress, something you'd see out of Game of Thrones. Along with being a really cool part of history, it also provides great views. And as you can probably tell if you've seen other videos, I am really into views. I love finding places, vantage points where you can really take in the whole city all at once. And there's another one later in this list that definitely goes along those lines. But the Castel, because it's right on the river and because it's higher than anything else around it, if you go to the top, it does involve some stairs if you're not really into stairs, but honestly, it's not too bad. You get great views of the Vatican, which is right next door, and also just all of Rome. You can see a little bit of the Coliseum. Unfortunately, it's kind of blocked by a few things, but it is a great view of Rome. You can kind of even see the foothills that surround it in the distance, and definitely, along with the Palatine Hill, one of my favorite views in the city. If you end up over by the Castel, you might as well just go to the Vatican from there because it's very, very close, walking distance from there. The Vatican is so fascinating. And just like we said with the Roman Coliseum in the forum, we have a link in the description for a private tour of the Vatican, which I would definitely recommend as the best way to take it in. The Vatican is very complex when you visit it. It's essentially a museum. It's an art museum. It's a history museum. It's a lot of different types of museums all at once, but it's a very complex experience there's a lot to it. And unless you are an absolute history buff, which probably means you've been to the Vatican already, you're not going to be able to take in a lot of that information by yourself. I know I would have been absolutely overwhelmed going in there and not knowing anything beforehand. And the tour guide was very, very helpful. The Vatican's a weird thing. I mean, it's its own country, so you can actually add it to your country list when you go in there. It's a separate country from Italy, and it's a sovereign nation within that little space of Rome. And there is a lot of corruption that goes into it. The amount of money that that runs through the Vatican, essentially, and how much of it is tax-free because of the religious implications of a lot of it. It raises some eyebrows, and I won't get too much into that because it's a very complex issue, but that's definitely eye-opening too, to kind of learn about that and all of the history behind that too. There's a lot of history within the Vatican, a lot of things in there that you kind of wonder, how is this here? Like, how do they still have this? How is this their property? It's fascinating. It's a very strange situation, definitely unique. You're not going to see something like the Vatican in every European city that you go to. It's a one of a kind. And even if you're not a religious person, even if you're not a Catholic person, it's definitely worth visiting. And apart from the museum aspect of it too, visiting St. Peter's Basilica is absolutely incredible. It's one of the most beautiful buildings I have ever stepped foot in. The scale of it, it's just huge. It's hard to even describe. And it's, not even being a really religious person, you feel a little spiritual when you're in there. It's just absolutely insane to imagine that this was built so long ago and stood the test of time and kind of towers over the city of Rome. Another highlight of our Roman adventure, the Via Borghese Park. This is the Park of Rome, the main park. So if you think of El Retiro in Madrid, or Hyde Park in London, the Englischer Garten in Munich, or even Central Park in New York, it's the main park that kind of defines the city. And what I thought is cool about it, I don't know if we just went at a good time and we got lucky, but it didn't feel like there were huge tourist crowds in there. It honestly felt like it was mostly locals taking in the park, and that's what I enjoyed about it. As much as I've been raving about Rome and the incredible experience it is to see all of these things in person, there is an undeniable con to all of the pros, and that's the tourist crowds. And it's probably funny, if you're from Rome or if you're from Italy, hearing me talk about the tourist crowds, because I'm a tourist myself. So hearing tourists complaining about tourists is probably absolutely hilarious. But it's just the nature of the situation. A lot of people are coming from a lot of different places to see all of these things because it's so, revered and so talked about in movies and films. And even if you're not a history buff, I truly believe that. Even if you're, couldn't care less about history, there's something magical and powerful about seeing these things. But because of that, it just attracts all of the tourists. So unfortunately, especially if you're there at a peak time too, it's just part of the experience that is impossible to avoid. And definitely kind of drains your mental energy just being in those big crowds, especially if it's hot. We were there at times when it was ridiculously hot, 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's just not fun to be out in that heat with all of those people, and you're kind of being shunted around, and it's definitely part of the experience that I would say is not as fun. But that's what's great about the Via Borghese Park, is going to this park, getting a little bit of a break from the sun. There's a lot of shade to it, and just being able to walk around a beautiful place. And in typical Roman fashion, there's awesome statues everywhere and all these cool artifacts. There's even a cool pond that kind of resembles the Retiro Park in Madrid. They even have the rowboats, which we did. The second time I've done this, and I still don't really know how to row a boat. It's kind of funny. My brain just doesn't work when I'm doing it. Like, wait, am I going backwards or forwards? I can never figure it out. But it was fun to do that. Really reminded us of our time in Madrid, and we got to do it with Sydney's Aunt Julie too, which was just a funny experience being in the boat. I remember I think we bumped into a few boats. So if you're not a boating expert, it's absolutely no problem. It's still fun to do. The boat ride is €5 a person. It's not even that pricey. I think it's a 20 to 25 minute ride they allow you. And there's even like wildlife in the pond too. There's turtles, there's swans, there's ducks and geese walking around. So it's a cool thing, all kind of surrounded by the beauty of the park and all of the artifacts and all of the statues and everything. It's a very, very cool park and a great way to kind of decompress, which is something you probably are going to want to do at some point while visiting Rome. Now, speaking of decompression, one of my favorite ways to decompress in Rome is to just enjoy some delicious pasta. Rome is truly one of the pasta capitals of the world, and Italy itself being a pasta capital of the world, it makes sense that Rome, the capital, would be as well. The pasta carbonara is actually the signature pasta dish of Rome, along with a few others as well. And it's just something that is so simple. It feels like it's such a simple dish, and you've probably had carbonara in other places, but I'm telling you, until you go to Rome, until you try carbonara in Rome, there's something different to it. They've perfected it over all this time, and it is truly a perfect dish. There is nothing that I would ever change about it. It is one of my favorite things I've ever tried during our travels. And that's saying a lot because there's a lot of good food in Italy. But having pasta carbonara in Rome, it's a special experience that you're not going to want to miss. There's such a creamy texture to the pasta, and a lot of people actually think there is cream in the pasta, but something that we learned while we were there probably is cream in a lot of carbonaras that you have outside of Italy. But a true carbonara actually has no cream in it whatsoever. And that creamy texture actually comes from the egg yolks and then the fat that is rendered from the guanciale, the little pieces of meat in there. It is so good. It is just absolutely to die for. There's a million places you can go to enjoy some of the best carbonara you're ever going to have in your life. And while we're on the topic of food, getting gelato in Rome is also a must. Just anywhere in Italy, enjoying some gelato is something I would definitely recommend pretty much every day if you find a place. But it's important to find the right place because you're going to see a lot of gelato places in the touristy hotspots. And the ones that you see the big case and the big display where there's those big containers of gelato and they're all kind of out there for everyone to see and they look so nice and so delicate and beautiful and you see all the colors. Those are actually not the best ones to enjoy, at least from what we understood, from what we heard from the locals. And that's because I guess they use a lot of preservatives to keep it in that form when it's just in the shelf, in the glass case, and you can kind of see it as you're coming in there. Apparently the best gelato is the ones that we actually had a funny term for it when we were there. We called it in the ground. And I know that makes absolutely no sense because it's not actually in the ground. But they have these big silver containers, and so you don't actually see the gelato when you go in there. You order the gelato, they open the silver container, and then they scoop it out for you. And I guess that's just a lot more fresh and a better way to preserve it. And they're using less artificial preservatives in that type of gelato. So it tastes better, it feels better when you eat it. And that's just what we heard from the locals. I'm not sure how true that is, but I definitely take their word for it because, I mean, now you see gelato everywhere. It's not just Italy. And when you have those big glass cases and you see the display, it just looks so appetizing, but you're also thinking like, why is it shaped like that? You know, like it doesn't look natural at all. When you have gelato that's true Italian gelato, it comes out of the silver containers where you're not actually seeing the gelato until you're enjoying it in your Kona dish. Now, if you're looking for a good place for sunset cocktails or even a nice sunset meal on a rooftop, I would definitely recommend, and it's in French for some reason, so my French is absolutely terrible. I apologize in advance for that. But I think it's called Terrazza l'Etoile, Roma at the end of it. And it's near the St. Peter's Basilica. Amazing view of that. And usually the sun sets kind of right over there too, so you get all the colors in the sky. That was definitely our most memorable rooftop experience in Rome, and I already mentioned it. I love the views. So that is definitely something to do. There's also a lot of rooftops and just a lot of cool, trendy restaurants and bars in the Trastevere neighborhood, which is a little bit south of where you're going to be for most of the tourist attractions. Trastevere has become very trendy, so a lot of people that are hanging out there are either people that live in Rome that are more of a younger crowd, young professionals, or the tourists that have heard that it's so cool and are coming over there too. So these are places where you're probably going to need a reservation for dinner, very popular and always, you know, usually pretty crowded, but it's a really fun place to walk around. Even if you're kind of just bar hopping, Trastevere is the place to do that. You've probably heard the famous quote, "Rome was not built in a day," but I think that's actually a really apropos thing when it comes to planning your trip around Rome, because a trip to Rome was also not built in a day. If you're going there for a day trip, it's probably not going to be the most enjoyable experience, and you're really going to have to cram everything in. It's going to be a very intense day. You're not going to have time to relax and kind of enjoy the other aspects of Roman life besides the tourist attractions that are so fun. And you are going to be in those tourist crowds all day too. So especially if you're in the heat, I just wouldn't really recommend a day trip to Rome unless you have absolutely no other choice. Spending at least 2 to 3 days there, maybe even 4 or 5, to really take it in, depending on how much you actually want to see there and how much you're looking forward to seeing. It's better to have more time for unplanned things, whether that's just walking around, walking down the Spanish Steps, walking through different neighborhoods, exploring the Via Borghese Park, things like that. Those are time-consuming things where if you are going to want to see all of the tourist attractions, you're probably just not going to have time to fit it all in. I sincerely hope this video was helpful for you. If you have any additional questions about different resources or things to look into as you're planning your trip to Rome, definitely put that in the comment section below and we'll be sure to get back to you. I would also say, just as a kind of closing comment, it really matters when you go. And it's kind of funny because we picked probably one of the worst times to go to Rome. We went during the Ryder Cup. And because of that, there were a lot of American tourists that were there for the golf event specifically. And one of the fun aspects of that was we found this Irish bar that was absolutely packed, and it was like half European golf fans, half American, and it was a fun little rivalry. But just in general, all of the attractions and all of that, it was so crowded, which I guess is kind of just how Rome is for the most part. But if you are able to go in a little bit less of a peak time, it can make all the difference. Obviously people have more free time in the summer, so a lot of times that's when people are coming, but you're gonna have to deal with two major factors: the heat. It gets really, really hot in Rome in the summer months, and even into like September when we were there, it was so hot. And then the tourist crowds that we keep mentioning. Those are inevitable obstacles that you're gonna have to go through, but trust me, the experience is worth it. Take it all in, go to the fun Irish bars on the corner, go to the markets, do other things besides the tourist attractions, because the tourist attractions are going to take a lot of mental energy. And even though you absolutely have to see them and they're going to be, for some people, life-changing experiences, it's important to find ways to decompress. And luckily, Rome offers a lot of experiences and opportunities to do that as well. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in the next video.